You've probably heard that you create your own reality, but what you have not seen is actual proof. In this video, I'm going to show you that proof through a situation you've experienced yourself, the science behind what your brain is doing every single day, and a personal story. So let's say you send a message to someone you really like. Nothing heavy, just something a little bit more open than what you would normally go for. And they see that message, it says seen, and they don't reply. At first you're fine, you maybe brush it off because you've got stuff to do, but then a little time passes, you check your phone again, still nothing. And that's when it starts. That's when your mind just quietly begins filling in the gap by saying things like, did I say too much? Did I read this wrong? Is there another person in their life? Or have they just lost interest and don't know how to say that? And the thing is, it stops feeling like a thought very quickly. It starts feeling like something that's actually happening. Your chest gets a little tight, you have that uneasiness in your stomach, you keep drifting back to that chat, you nearly send a follow-up message but talk yourself out of it, and without making any conscious decision, you've basically concluded something about them, something about yourself, and something about where this relationship is going. And then a few hours later, they send you a message saying, sorry for the late reply, my phone broke, I had to send it for repairing. And just like that, the whole story dissolves. And in that moment, if you're paying attention, you can see it so clearly, how real it felt, how long you lived inside of it, and how completely you built it yourself. Not on purpose, but still you built it. Because if you strip it all the way back to what actually happened, a message was sent, it was read, and no reply came. That's it. That's the whole event. Everything else around, the meaning you gave it, the tension in your physical body, the way you were showing up for the rest of those hours, all of that came from how your mind chose to interpret one thing. And it didn't even get it right. Now I want you to sit with that for a second, because that same process, that same engine is not just running when you're waiting on a text, it's running everywhere all the time in every single area of your life. By the way, if you're meeting for the first time, my name is Prakhar. I'm an entrepreneur who's built companies and worked on multi-million-dollar negotiations. What I'm sharing isn't theory, it's lessons learned under real-world high-stakes pressure. When I was 23, I was working with a coach and she gave me a simple exercise. She said, write down every single thing that you want. Not what you think is realistic, everything. The life that you actually want to be living. So I sat down and I wrote everything down. At that time, I was living in New Delhi, India, and no version of the life I was actually writing about was anywhere in my immediate view. But I wrote it anyways, things like I want to live near a beach, I want to live with my closest friends, I want to travel the world, I want to make a specific amount of money. And at that time, it felt ambitious. I mean, in all transparency, it felt a little unrealistic. But I still wrote it and I did the work that followed. And I'll tell you what that work actually was in a second, because this is important. And then I put the piece of paper away. Life moved forward, and I think I largely forgot about that piece of paper until 18 months later. I was standing on a balcony in Dubai. I think I was 7-8 minutes away from the beach. It was a 5-bedroom villa, some of my closest friends living under the same roof, and I'd been to 4 or 5 countries in the last 2.5 months. And the number I was making, I wasn't making the one that I wrote, I was actually making 4 times what I had written. And it was only standing on that balcony looking at the skyline of Dubai, I remembered that piece of paper. It was not 1 or 2 things that I had written, it was almost all of it, and in a span of 18 months. And some of it even exceeded. Now I'll be transparent about what I was actually doing in those 18 months, because this is where most people in this space, they get vague. And vague over here is useless. So at that time, I wasn't visualizing every morning. I wasn't obsessing over the outcome. What I was doing internally was something I can maybe describe as a settled familiarity. I read what I had written so many times that it had stopped feeling like a wish and it had started to feel more like a description. Like something I was already living, just slightly ahead of schedule. Not desperately wanting it or anxiously hoping for it to come true, just a quiet sense that this is amazing. And then from that internal state, the actions I took looked different, the decisions I made were also different, and the opportunities I noticed them because my brain was already tuned to a version of that life. Same pattern we talked about. You see something, you interpret it, you feel something, and then you act from it, And this all shapes up what happens next. The only difference here is, instead of this pattern running on autopilot as it was being run when we were waiting for that reply on that message, this time it was shaped by something I had consciously put in place. Same system, just being directed differently. Now I'll show you why these two experiences are not random. There's a real mechanism underneath both of them. And it's backed by science, and it's happening in your life all the time, whether you notice it or not. Your brain, it has a filter. It's called the reticular activating system, RAS. Your brain, it cannot consciously process the millions of pieces of information coming at it every second. So what it does is it filters. It decides what gets through to your attention and what doesn't. And the filter is set by what you are focused on, what you believe is relevant, what you've decided matters to you. For example, let's say you decide you want to buy a new car, let's say a black Range Rover. And from the moment you make that decision, you start seeing black Range Rovers everywhere, on every street, in every car park. You never noticed them before. They obviously did not suddenly multiply. They were always there. You, however, just could not see them because your brain, it had no reason to let them through. And the moment you decided they were relevant, the filter changed. And suddenly, those black Range Rovers are everywhere. Now I want you to apply that to what we've been talking about. In the message scenario, your brain decided that the relevant signal was something is wrong. And from that moment, your filter started letting through every piece of evidence that confirmed it. Because the longer the silence was, the more evidence. The more evidence, the deeper the state. And the deeper the state, the more your actions reflected someone who believed that something had gone wrong. In the part where I'm living in Dubai, the internal state I was holding on to meant that my brain's filter was tuned to the fact that this is available to me. And from that state, I started to notice the conversations differently, the opportunities, the doors that were already there that I would have normally walked past otherwise, if my brain did not turn that filter on that this is available to me. Same world, different filter, different reality. And that filter is set by belief. What you hold to be true about yourself and what's possible for you. Now this is not mystical. This is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. Finding what you've told it to look for. The only question is, who chose what it's looking for? In the case of the message, it was on autopilot. In the case in which I'm living in Dubai, I chose that consciously. Now here's the uncomfortable extension of that. The same system, when it's running on that constant, why isn't this here yet? Why is my desire not here yet? Actually works against you in a very specific way that neuroscience has mapped out. I've covered that in a detailed manner in a separate video. I will actually add the link in the description down below. It will deepen what we're discussing here. Now the part most people in this space don't want to look at is, you are creating your reality. Not sometimes, not when you remember to do the practice, always you're creating your reality. Which means you're also creating the experiences you don't want. For example, let's say you start your day and you start your day with an argument with someone who's very close to you. It's nothing like major, but it's enough to like throw you off your game. You walk away from that conversation and something just feels off. And if you're not paying attention, your mind quietly decides at that point of time that, yeah, today is going to be one of those days. You don't say it out loud, but it's there in the background. And from that point onwards, everything starts getting colored by it. Someone, let's say, replies a little late, it annoys you much more than it normally would. Something small doesn't go your way, it feels bigger than it actually is. You're just slightly off in everything. And without realizing it, you start showing up differently. Maybe a little impatient, a little closed-minded, and that starts affecting things. Conversations, they're not going as well as they normally would. Work feels harder than usual. Even simple things feel like an effort. And by the end of the day, you're drained, even though nothing major really happened. And somewhere in your head, you feel like that the whole day just didn't go right. But if you really look at it, it started with that one moment in the morning, that argument, and everything after that just kept getting seen through the same lens. Now I want to be clear here, because this is where a lot of thinking about this goes wrong. because this is not about positive thinking. It's not about pretending things don't happen. What we're talking about here is different. Difference between feeling something and then building an entire unchecked story on top of it that runs forward into the rest of your day, versus feeling something, seeing it clearly, and then making a conscious choice about where the machine goes next. Now, most people never get to that choice because they're not watching the machine. They're inside of their own machine. And this is the reason results feel inconsistent. Not because this doesn't work, because the engine, it's always running. And some days it's running on what you've chosen, and on some days it's running on whatever the default software says. And without understanding that this is what's happening, you have no real leverage over it. So if you zoom out, it's not just events driving your life, it's the meaning you assign to those events in real time, often without even noticing it. And most of your life is being shaped there. So now that you understand the mechanism, like how your brain filters reality based on what you've told it to look for, the natural next question is, what happens when that filter gets set by fear instead of belief? Because there is an answer to it backed by neuroscience, and once you see that, it reframes a lot. I've added that video in the description down below, and I'll see you there.